Embrace the whole green planet. It is possible to be that large.
Hello, this is Penn Kemp, and you are listening to Gathering Voices on CHRW 94.9 FM. Today we are celebrating the eve of National Poetry Month, so I thought we would flaunt poetry. And Barry Dempster, who is a poet, a wonderful poet that you'll be hearing in a couple of minutes, and also Brick Books. He is an editor and a poet published by Brick. And Brick, as you know, is a local London publishing house that's been going for 35 years. And so we are celebrating poetry publishing in London. I'll be reading a poem that was commissioned for Brick Books by Beat Magazine and will be published there. And I'd like now to introduce you to Barry Dempster. He is the author of 9 previous collections of poetry. Burning Alphabet, which was published by Brick, won the 2006 Canadian Authors Association Jack Chambers Award, and it was also nominated for the Governor General's in 2005. Barry has been an absolute stalwart of the writing community, the poetry community, and he has been taking lessons, taking workshops in Chile. So one of the things that I'm going to connect here is the theme of National Poetry Month, which is climate changes, and Barry's reaction to the earthquake in Chile. So welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Penn. Good to be here.
Mm-hmm. And I did wonder how you reacted, since you would have known so well the terrain and the people of Chile.
It's amazing. We live in such a safe country in so many ways in Canada that often the world tragedies, they affect us, and powerfully so, but not on an individual basis. We have to sort of stretch ourselves wider. And it just was such a shock because I had been in Chile just a year ago and knew many of the areas quite well. And had friends there that I met at that time a year ago. So there was a lot of worry on a personal level, but also just a great deal of compassion for what the people were going through.
It seems more real when you know the terrain and the people.
It does. You can actually picture it, and it just takes that one step further.
Did it drive you to writing? Did you write poems through it the way Ireland drove Yeats to poetry?
I wrote. It's very interesting for me. My experience in Chile was running a master class. So basically, the people that I was working with were writing up a storm, and I was basically trying to inspire them and was not able to write very much at all myself. But I found upon returning home that I wrote a lot about Chile. So I am looking forward to actually going back to some of that work and adding some new poems that come from the shock and grief at what happened.
It's such the word shock is so appropriate. I was in a bad earthquake, the worst in the 20th century in Colombia, and it's such a betrayal. The earth is shaking under you. So Barry, what I'd like to ask you to do is read a poem it's called The Third Presence from Love Outlandish.
All right. The book, Love Outlandish, is really sort of an examination of romantic love, and especially the idea of unrequited love. And it's something that I got thinking about, the realization that when two people come together and create a reality together, they almost create a third presence, a presence that takes from one person and from the other person. And the question I began to ask myself was, what happens when that relationship ends? What happens to that third presence? So the poem is called Third Presence. You with your face stuck inside a mirror, an open window looking out on a world where you were everything, and me staring in at you, a moon nestled on the windowsill, the big light of admiration. A perfect twosome, eh? Loved and loving. Now that it's over, it's not you I worry about. or even me with my misplaced shine. But what happened to the blending of us both, the third presence, that energy resonating between need and inspire? I picture a smudge of white against the blue blood sky, something that can almost be wiped away. I've lost a sense of myself, my shadow unstitched and slipping into every crack. There's a loneliness out there that doesn't know its own worth, a darkness wild for any kind of bright. I take walks every afternoon, hoping to find something I recognize in the certain pink of a stranger's face, or a groan in the space between my own familiar breaths. But every happenstance pulses with an odd newness, one experimental poem after another, a tree in the shape of a startled crow, a license plate making gibberish of the alphabet, a handmade sign on a hydro pole proclaiming a lostness named Lucy. No evidence of anything that looks like me. In fact, the only constant is the weaving line of snow prints in the snow behind me. Evidence of intention, a dogged state of desire. Could it be that loneliness is stalking, or am I continuing to shed bits of it all over the place? Am I mistaking myself for someone who deserves a following? Rilke asks if the earth knows me, and I have to shake my head. It appears that I'm the man in the moon and will shine on absolutely anything. I'm the one who paints windowsills white, who slips midnight mirrors their ghosting. And I'm the one who loved you knowing full well you'd never love me back. A martyr, a fool, how easy it is to name a sunspot blindness. That loneliness is right here on the page, in the way the words relate to one another. A wariness that makes a feeble kind of music, afraid to come right out and cry. The third presence is who I am now, the old me so bruised and tattered that it simply fades away. In the daylight it's hard to tell the difference, but look closely. The scars where you used to begin or end, I forget which. The stitching where my shadow can be ripped off, there, see, the new sheen. That slight rippling where the skin hasn't yet settled over bone.
Thank you. That's so beautifully read. And the reason I ask you to read it, it's from Love Outlandish by Brick Books, is that it did connect in a certain way, not just with love and romance, but with our connection with the earth.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by the phrase that I didn't know, the quote where Rilke asks if the earth knows me.
If the earth knows you, yes. I wish I could remember the whole quote, but it starts with, does the earth know you? And I had written it down, and I really had felt that it was something that I wasn't sure. Whether, in a sense, I think Love Outlandish is a book that really is about a love affair with the world on a larger sense. And I really started with the idea of wanting to write love poems to the world. And then there was the realization that in some ways a relationship with the world feels unrequited. As it goes on without us quite easily, it seems at times.
Very happily, more happily than with us, I think, at this juncture.
Yes. And as it sometimes destroys us, such as, the earthquake in Haiti and Chile. And so it was truly at a deeper level a book. The entire book is really about the idea of loving the world regardless of whether it loves you back.
And yet, because we are earth, we are in ourselves loved.
Yes. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that we expect a love that is almost a self-aggrandizing, and not realizing that the way that the world and nature and wild loves us is very different than the way we love back. And the importance to accept that and to realize that sometimes a a hefty wind that knocks you over is a way of saying hello.
It's certainly not a personal self-aggrandizing, as you say.
No.
But what I find also interesting in this love affair with the world is how you find an odd newness, one experimental poem after another,
yes.
in the walk, in the things that come up.
Yes.
And it's extraordinary to me how, in reading both this and Ivan's Birches by Peddler Press, how you find poems everywhere. Everything inspires you to poetry, and that inspired me to write. So thank
wonderful.
you.
Wonderful. I'm so glad. I think that I reached a point about 5 or 6 years ago where I began to feel a bit bereft of poetry. I think there just were some challenging things going on in my life, and I didn't surrender to the work in the way that I probably should have. And in trying to find my way back, I came up with this idea of a poet's walk that I began to incorporate into my workshops that I do. And it's basically taking people into circumstances, whether they be woods or shopping malls or mountaintops, and basically engaging with everything on a sensual level, looking, listening, touching, tasting, sniffing. I'm really just taking the world in every possible way that you could. And I realized that what seemed like group work really at the core of it was something that comes from one's independence or individuality. So I started taking those walks on my own, not thinking they would pay off in poetry so much, but pay off in a sense of peace and fulfillment. And, of course, the poetry came.
Yeah, I've noticed throughout your work how encompassing the five senses are. You include them all, and a couple of sixth senses like spirits too. Sixth and
I think
seventh.
I even found a seventh sense.
What's that?
I'm not sure. It's a great mystery. But I know that one day I was walking down the street. I live in a sort of suburban area of a small town. So you could be anywhere, I suppose. And I'm walking down the street, and I realized that I stopped at a sewer and was listening to the burble beneath me. And I began to start sounding lines and words for a possible poem, and realized that if anyone came out of their house and said, "What are you doing?" I'm listening for a poem. And I realized I was lost at that point, so I simply decided to embrace my lostness.
Now that's what you call creative surrender.
Yes, exactly.
It's fascinating to me how it works in with the theme of National Poetry Month. It's a theme I suggested on climate changes, and it reads, as a society we continue to change politically, ecologically, culturally, and economically. And so I wanted to ask you the question that the League of Canadian Poets is asking every poet: how do changing climates affect you?
What I notice is that there is a different world than what the world was that I grew up in. And that those differences sometimes are minor to people, and they walk around basically saying, well, it's a warmer winter, therefore, whatever is making a climate change, we enjoy it because it's bringing us something we want. But the realization that we, of course, evolve, and the planet evolves, but we also get involved in a way that is destructive. And those changes that occur in small ways start having profound effects on people. And I begin to see the way in which the world, weather-wise, is relating to the expectations and how those things are changing. And those changes, I think, are worrisome because there is a real sense of not being able to return. And that if we go too far, we will reach a point where there is no place to reinvigorate. So I think that on a daily basis, I look at weather as something that we have to learn to live with and have have as little effect on as we possibly can.
It strikes me throughout your work that you're always the observer, the watcher, and yet, as we know from science, the watcher does affect, even in watching.
Yes.
But you've got one poem in Peddler's Ivan's Birches called "All You Can Do Is Describe."
Yes.
All I can do is describe.
And sometimes, I mean, the realization, it's very true that description has a ripple effect on the world, whether it be simply one person that reads that poem and takes those descriptions and begins to listen to the world around them. And
with a little more precision and
with a little more
clarity and
precision.
compassion.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
that we really do have the power to make huge changes, sometimes from the smallest of gestures.
I love that sense of the ripple. And the other thing that I notice in all your work is that you have a sort of, it seems to me, a love-hate relationship with losing yourself in the other. And part of that is the sort of ekphrastic thing that you do in working with poems by Varley or Morrisseau. And it's almost like that writer, that will not going to come to me right now, where he becomes the asiotl, and the asiotl looks back. There's often that flip of transformation in your work when you dissolve into the painting, into the work of art, into the song.
I think it comes from, I mean, having come from a Plymouth Brethren background, which is certainly fundamentalism at its most powerful, you really do learn that everything that you partake of has a great effect on you. And I began to realize as I moved away from that and into a more Eastern philosophy, the realization that I too have a great effect on everything that I pay attention to. And it is the blending of identities that I'm fascinated with, that staring at a painting really does change you. It does transform you and bring you into a form of selfness that is quite different than when you simply stand back and are alone. So I believe that, like it or not, for better for worse, I'm in a powerful relationship with the world around me, whether that be a sewer or a Varley painting.
Or you're absolutely describing what Keats called negative capability.
Yes.
In the poem Calling Carver, in all your work, you're calling things to life. I find that not just to life, but you're calling them to live more intensely.
Yes.
It's speaking, whether it's memory or whether it's other friends or poets or just references or the daily, the crow or everything. You call it into life, Barry. It's lovely.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I think that, I mean, as some people have, at the best of it, I am called passionate. At the worst of it, I'm called too intense. But I do think that...
I'm going into Alberti now, for I was a sensitive man.
I think when you grow up having a very profoundly passionate relationship with God, whether it be a good one or not, it really does show you that the volatility of relationships.
And the volatility of illusion, because you go from the intense connection with things. Sometimes it goes surreal into further and further metaphors until you've pushed art. And as I was listening to, or reading your work, I went from art to articulation, the need for art and the need for articulation, to the point where it's just pushed to the ultimate. It's pushed to the limit of the metaphor.
Yes. Well, let's hope that I don't send anyone toppling over the edge.
Well, I think it's that emptiness that we're reaching for in a way, that is fullness. Do you have a routine or a daily practice? Because these poems feel that they have got such a consistency, not of style and not of theme, but that you've captured the rhythm that comes before words. I'm always interested in listening to the rhythm that comes before language?
I do have a very strong routine, because I find that being susceptible to the world, opening yourself to it, means that you can very often get swept off your feet and have no sense of how to engage with the world other than tumble over and over. So I find that if I wait for the writing to come to me, invariably flat tires and window cracks and cats that are hungry and banking emergencies happen right, left, and center, and I'm unable to enter the poem. So what I do is I give the first part of the day to poetry. I get up, I get myself put together, I exercise, thinking the whole time about words, and then I spend the next 3 to 4 hours working as many days a week as possible. Ideally for me, I would be doing it 7 days a week. It's when I feel the most alive and the most engaged. Then when I walk out, mid-afternoon, I'm ready for the world to blow me off my feet. And
to provide you with new metaphors for poetry.
To provide you with new metaphors, that's right. To lose me and to find me all over again, knowing that the next morning I will be able to go back into the writing room and be with the words.
And it's the world that replenishes you?
Yes, very much so. Whether that world, whether it's climbing a mountain in Chile or whether it's walking the suburban streets listening to the sewers burble, huge amounts in both those places. And so I try to find it wherever I find myself.
Well, I'd love to conclude by having you read the poem Bridging. And as we know, a bridge is a metaphor. That's the derivation of the word, so it seemed appropriate, especially as you're taking time out after writing to go handle things like the post office and the gas station.
Yes. This is interesting. Bridging came from this experience that about 3 years ago, they were repairing the small bridge at River Drive Park, which is just 2 minutes away from where I live. And basically they put up red lights on both sides of the bridge. And it seemed that it must have been 4 or 5 months that they were doing this construction. And out in the country, you don't expect to get held up by construction the way you do in the city. I got every red light there was. So I'd see people go gliding through the green light, but by the time I'd get there, it would invariably turn red every time. And I would sit there for 10 minutes sometimes before they would actually allow me to continue on. So I began writing this poem, and over a period of 4 or 5 months until I finally sat down with it. Bridging. They're deconstructing the Holland River Bridge, hauling huge chunks of concrete to the elephant graveyard. Carp are swimming up on their backs, keeping tabs, dodging fallout. Up above, where dust clouds patter, 2 Canada geese slow down and sling expletives at the chaos. Stupid little men. As for me, obeying the red light, subtracting 3 minutes from my life, I'm not sure which category I fit. The ruins, the wreckers, or the watchers. I feel the treads in my tires squirming, wish that I could soar, knock those geese aside, shove some serious shadow. It's not that I have places to go. The post office and the gas station will wait for me. But still, I can't stop thinking momentum. My hand sliding up your knee. Another poem added to the pile. The flood of thoughts being filed away. Always more room, more restlessness. How many seconds does it take to read this? I'm stuck, wedged between a jeep and a van, breathing in the stink of gas and river. A jackhammer shakes the whole town to its rusty spring. For a moment, the water is composed of 1,000 coils of frenzy, the air pared to pure static. On the radio, Mariah Carey takes a high note and cuts off its ear. Is it going too far to say panic? I can almost feel your thigh, the squeeze of a new metaphor, the whole car collapsed into a single thought. By the time the light snaps green, I'm shaking like concrete being lifted from its weight, crossing the river, an act of faith. The carp like smoke swimming from my tailpipe, the geese crapping gentle rain, bridging the gaps, pretending to flow.
It's such a perfect poem to end our interview and the discussion of changing climates, how they affect us and our community and the larger communities. Do you read, though, your work out loud before you publish it?
I do. Mm-hmm. I read it out loud. I read it to friends. I intone it to the birch trees in the backyard.
And the crows.
And the crows. I am just so obsessed with rhythm that I find that it doesn't necessarily come naturally. So I find that I need to hear the voice of the poem, and the only way I can do that is by reciting it out loud. So I'm listening as much as reading.
Does the rhythm of the poem come to you before the words do? Virginia Woolf talks about this as the rhythm. Once she gets the rhythm, she can get the novel. But
yes, I very much hear the rhythm first. I almost hear beats. And then I start hearing the relationship between syllables, whether it be assonance or alliteration or sound echoes. And then I start hearing the actual meaning of the poem. And it's quite often that I'll sit down to write a poem about a crow, and it'll end up being a poem about a Cadillac. The language has its way of determining.
Yeah, we just use the same word. We should put up our little finger.
Yes.
I don't think we recognize how much perception is limited, as Blake would say, to our five senses, but which can just explode out.
Yeah.
It's not it's not supernatural, it's extra sensory. It's
yes, and especially when you really give your attention to your senses and to the world around you, I think you develop these even more acute abilities to be able to see and hear and taste the world around you.
That we'll call that the perceptual muscle.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Barry, it's been a delight to talk to you. And
thank you, Penn. It's been wonderful to be on the show. I really appreciate your close reading of my work.
Well, you have been listening to Ivan's Britches by Barry Dempster and Love Outlandish by Barry Dempster, published respectively by Peddler Press and our own Brick Books. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Gathering Voices with your host, Penn Kemp, listener, convener, conversazione, and I shall return in 2 weeks with yet another program of literary delight. Talk to you then.
Embrace the whole green planet. It is possible.